The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 47. Fondness, Fighting, Fraternity. Disguised as Padfoot, Sirius hurried out the door of the grimy pub, turning right to walk towards the high street. He was nervous. His newfound companionship was in the very early stages, and he did not know where it was going. He only knew that he enjoyed spending time with this person, and the timing was shite. Each of them on opposite sides in a battle for world domination and all. Just ahead, a figure emerged from the darkness. Padfoot stopped and slunk into the shadows, unsure if this was friend or foe. Then a low whistle, familiar immediately to him. It was Quentin Jugson. He hurried forward, bounding up to the wizard with the shaggy dark blonde hair, jumping and placing his paws on the man's shoulders in a surprising show of affection. Padfoot, the man said urgently, unable to stop the smile from creeping onto his face. Quick, in here. Quentin pointed to a nearby tea shop, which had already closed for the evening, unlocking the door with his wand. Inside, Quentin rapidly drew the curtains of the tiny shop and turned back to his friend in dog form, in time to see the start of his transformation. He looked away to give Sirius some privacy, as his human form emerged, and the disillusioned clothes reappeared. "I'm glad to see you safe," Sirius said, approaching but stopping short of touching the man. "Harry could see a bit of what was happening at Malfoy Manor, I believe. You weren't punished?" "No. I only arrived after the summons. I'd been in London for a meeting. I think the straw deal is close," Jugson said, a note of excitement creeping into his voice, despite the dire circumstances they found themselves in. "Horrible timing, though." "You're smart," Sirius said, with a glimmer in his eye. "You'll come out of this all right, and you'll do big things with it, I know." Quentin looked his friend in the eye, and returned the smile, warmly. It was hard not to like the dark-haired Gryffindor. Quentin had had a small crush on him in their years together at Hogwarts, but of course had never acted upon it. Who was he, back then, to catch the eye of such a popular, attractive boy as Sirius Black? Even now, Quentin found it hard not to look at the man with longing. He turned away swiftly, busying himself by checking his pockets for potions and other supplies. "Did you ever come here, Quinn? With a date, I mean?" Sirius asked in a tight voice. The dark-haired wizard was standing much closer now, having moved behind Quentin silently. Quentin schooled his features whilst still facing away from Sirius. He could not reveal his true thoughts to the other wizard. Sirius had likely been here with many girls over the years. He'd always been popular, well-liked, chased by witches. Quentin supposed he himself had been chased by a fair few as well, though he'd always made it clear he wasn't interested. "No, I didn't date much at Hogwarts," Quentin said lightly, chuckling. "I suppose you likely came here enough for both of us?" "Not really. Not with anyone important." A part of Quentin, a large part, if he was being honest with himself, wanted to turn around and face the other man, to put his arms around the other wizard. He wanted to lean close, to say something dashing and debonair. "You're here with someone important now, maybe. Or, let me be that someone." But his voice was caught in his throat, his arms frozen at his side, and the moment passed. Instead, he choked out, "So, what is your plan? Are you going into the school to fight?" "Yes, my godson is in there, as are my friends. They need me," Sirius said simply. "I need you," Quentin wanted to say, but he was silent. Sirius cleared his throat. "Do you want to come with me?" Come. Quentin's eyes widened in shock.
Come with you? You would allow a Death Eater to accompany you into the castle?
Sirius's eyes shone in the darkness, black pools staring into the icy blue of his own.
I would allow you to accompany me. You're my friend. I trust you.
Quentin really did surge towards Sirius then, arms slightly outstretched as though he were about to hug the man, but he dropped his arms as he approached, instead sticking out one hand to grasp.
I would be honored to come with you, to fight with you, to fight for you.
It was as close an admission of love that Quentin dared to make. Even if he could not have Sirius as his own, he would do everything in his power to keep the man safe from harm.
How will we get in there, though?
Sirius walked over to the window, flicking the drapes slightly to peek out into the street.
We'll go to Honeyduke's. I know the way in. I'll lead the way.
Quentin bit his lip to avoid saying the phrase that popped into his mind instantly. I'll follow wherever you lead me. When he looked back up again, he was looking into the black eyes of the large dog.
Let's go,
he said with a small smile, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's neck. The fighting in the school was erratic. Small pockets of Death Eaters were confronted by Dumbledore's army, the Order of the Phoenix, or a combination of both. The Order and the DA were focused, but they were finding the Death Eaters to be a bit all over the place. Most of the Death Eaters were still hopped up on Unhinged Binge, the new, more powerful version of the Fixer Elixir. Whilst it was true this led to many of their spells going higgledy-piggledy, and not at all where they intended, it also meant that the spells were quite powerful when they did hit. When Sirius and Quentin emerged from the statue of the one-eyed witch, they were shocked to find Peter Pettigrew and Remus Lupin locked in battle.
"Sirius Black!"
Peter said in his wheezy voice, turning to stare at Sirius, his former friend, and Quentin Jugson, his current colleague.
"What are you doing here?" "Surprised to see me, Peter?" Sirius grinned wickedly, sending a hex Peter's way. "Pleased, more like. This will tie up loose ends nicely, if I can get rid of 2 of the old marauders, like I got rid of James."
Peter sent a stunner towards Sirius, and it blasted him backwards despite his shield charm. The Unhinged Binge truly did make gods out of mere mortals, at least temporarily. In furious anger, Remus and Quentin fought back for their temporarily fallen friend. Quentin fought especially ferociously. Within moments, Peter's adrenaline rush wore out, and he was subdued in manacles conjured by Lupin. "Be careful! He is liable to transform at any moment," Lupin panted, holding Peter at wand point, whilst Quentin checked on Sirius.
"That's what I'm counting on, Remus,"
Sirius said viciously, standing up and conjuring a small jar with holes poked in the lid.
"A friend of ours had a very helpful suggestion as for what to do with our good friend Peter, here, if we ever got the chance. Quentin, will you hold this for me?"
Sirius held out the jar to Quentin, then turned on his old friend.
"Ready, Wormtail?"
"Sirius! No! I can't!" But whatever Peter could not do, they would not find out. Sirius and Lupin forced Peter's transformation back into the small, squeaking rat, and the 2 of them pounced upon him, forcing his wriggling body into the unbreakable jar. Quentin capped it quickly, and the 3 of them grinned together. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure of meeting." Lupin stuck out a hand genially to the sandy-haired wizard. "Remus Lupin."
"I remember you," the wizard said. "Quentin Jugson. I was a few years behind you at Hogwarts."
"Quentin is my—" Sirius broke in, his eyes never leaving Quentin.
"Well, he's mine."
A cool sweat broke out all over Quentin's body at these words, and he looked swiftly, wide-eyed, up at Sirius. "That's wonderful to hear.
Which reminds me, I believe mine is also wandering somewhere around the castle. I'm going to stow this in the headmaster's office, and then go find her. Good luck, you two." Remus hurried away with the jawed rat, leaving the two of them alone. "Thank you for your help there," Sirius smirked, facing the nervous Jugson. "You were wonderful."
Quentin could no longer help it. He reached out his hands to hold the other wizard's arms, pulling him close. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought you were dead." His voice broke, and his face flushed, knowing how this admission must sound, but hoping that Sirius would not push him away. "I'm not going anywhere. Not if I can help it," Sirius said. "Not unless you're coming with me." The two of them moved towards each other at the same time, their lips meeting in a kiss. Quentin's arms encircled Sirius, and Sirius's hands came up to run through the sandy blonde locks. They kissed for a long moment, each feeling more euphoric than either of them had in a long time. A far-away blast from the direction opposite of where Remus had disappeared brought them back to reality. They broke apart, still holding hands, grinning stupidly at each other. "Shall we go fight, then?" Quentin asked. "Let's," agreed Sirius, and they set off into the fray. Richard, Narcissa, and Lucius waited anxiously in the back room of the Three Broomsticks, each of them uncertain of what to do. Narcissa's mobile phone buzzed. Lucius watched with wide eyes as his witch withdrew the tiny device from her pocket and began scrolling to read the message. "You have a magical Motorola device?" he asked incredulously. "I think it's a Nokia, actually," Narcissa said, reading. She looked up at Richard. "Linda says that she and Dora are going into the school. Dora is doing something to their mobile phones to make them work inside."
"Linda!" Lucius gasped. "Sissa! She's an assassin for the Dark Lord!"
"Whatever gave you that idea, Lucius?"
Narcissa smiled indulgently at him. Lucius looked back and forth between the two of them. "Well, the extractions. That is to say—"
"Lulu, I told you. Linda is not an assassin," Narcissa said with a barely suppressed laugh. "Isn't that right, Richard?"
"I mean, she blows me away almost every day," Richard said with a warm smile. "But as for actually killing people, no, it's not in her general purview." "The extractions!" Lucius muttered to himself. Narcissa rolled her eyes and looked back at Richard, speaking quietly to him.
"They asked if I wanted to come into the castle to fight, but the more I think about it, the more I believe I should stay out here. Many in the Order do not know where I truly stand, so I feel I might be more of a hindrance."
Tonks and Linda made their way up the narrow staircase into the room of requirement from the back of the Hogshead Inn. "I need to find Remus," Tonks said, "but first I think I should take you up to the infirmary. Pomfrey should be up there, and she's probably already dealing with a lot. She could use the help from you." They made their way out of the room into the abandoned corridor and hurried for a staircase. Linda's head was on a swivel as she took in the shouting portraits, empty statue plinths, and distant sounds of fighting. Through a nearby broken window came the discordant sounds of an overly loud trumpet playing a non-melody off-key, accompanied by an offbeat snare drum. "Seems like an odd time for music class," Tonks said in confusion. They rounded the stairwell down the corridor to the infirmary. Inside, Madame Pomfrey bustled about, directing house elves and students to gather supplies. "Madame Pomfrey, I brought you help. This is Linda Granger. She's a Muggle healer, a doctor," Tonks explained. "Ah, yes, Hermione's mother. Excellent. We can use all the help we could get. I'm taking this group down to the Great Hall. Shacklebolt says the injured will be taken there," Pomfrey said, pointing her wand at a cabinet and directing the bandages that flew from it into a basket. A few of the students exchanged nervous looks, uncertain about accepting help from Hermione Granger's mother. Though most students now knew where she stood, there were still some that doubted her sincerity. "You'll be all right here?" Tonks asked Linda, her eyes already roaming towards the door, eager to find Remus in the fight. "Absolutely. Go. I'll be fine," Linda reassured her. She turned to Madame Pomfrey, whose no-nonsense, bustling manner reminded her very much of her own mother, Octavia Cavendish. "It's a pleasure to be working with you, Doctor." "Doctor? No, I'm a healer. But I must say, I'm quite pleased to have your help." As the group made their way through the castle, Linda's eyes were wide, watching everything. At one point, the angry, cat-like yowl that she recognized as Bellatrix Lestrange caught her ear as they passed one another on 2 staircases that were moving close by each other. Linda pulled the basket she was carrying higher to obscure her face, and watched as the furious witch strode up the stairs, holding her long skirts aloft to avoid stepping on them. A short while later, a grizzled, grey-haired wizard with piercing blue eyes passed by them, nodding hello to Madame Pomfrey. "Poppy." "Aberforth?" The older witch smiled in answer, with a sudden blush to her cheeks. After he passed, the 2 women fell back a bit from the students and elves. Linda turned conspiratorially to Madame Pomfrey. "Old boyfriend of yours?" "We've had a thing, off and on, for about 60 years, Pomfrey said, with a little girlish giggle. "He asked me to marry him once. The only problem was, I wanted to see the world after school. He wanted to plant roots. After that, the timing just never felt right. Nowadays, we only meet for an occasional drink, or snog."
Linda tried and failed to school her features into neutrality. Amused shock struck her mute.
"What, you didn't think we had it in us, at our age?"
Pomfrey laughed. Linda giggled her agreement at this, and pushed the idea of her own parents out of her mind. Soon after, another equally surprising sight met her eyes, and chased all fleeting thoughts of geriatric romance from her brain. Albus Dumbledore, moving swiftly down the corridor towards them, eyes focused on the battle, raging, going on upstairs behind them.
"Godspeed, Professor," called Madame Pomfrey, as the students and elves stared in utter disbelief after the supposedly deceased man. "Thank you, Poppy. Good luck to you, and Linda, and your helpers as well," Albus said kindly as they passed. "You know Professor Dumbledore?" Madame Pomfrey asked as they huffed down yet another infernal staircase. Linda, who'd been running on sheer adrenaline since the bank heist, knew she'd be paying for today in muscle soreness tomorrow. She resolved to look into that jazzercised nonsense that her mother swore by. We met just after his disappearance," Linda said. Yes, that makes sense," nodded Pomfrey. "You know, I never got to tell your husband what a fabulous job he did, getting rid of Professor Dumbledore's affliction that way. I suppose the 2 of you work often together on tasks like that?"
Linda tilted her head in confusion, but simply filed it away as one of the 2,000 things she needed to ask her husband about after tonight.
"We do work together in the Muggle world," she agreed.
Bellatrix Lestrange was finding all of this surprisingly easy. She'd already hexed a number of students, killing one. She'd taken on a couple of members of the Order of the Phoenix who ran away when she sent a slicing hex their way, and she encountered a group of house elves who popped away before she could bludgeon them to death. She alone had been, on the whole, unaffected by the supposedly improved Fixer Elixir. She had tried it, of course. Prudently, she'd waited until several other Death Eaters had finished their first 3 cans, and had remained alive, just in case it was poison.
But her curiosity won out, and she downed 2 cans in a matter of moments. The unhinged binge barely caused a blip on her radar. This was likely because she was already quite unhinged. She rounded a corner, coming face to face with a worthy adversary at last. Dumbledore! But no, this man only looked like Dumbledore. No matter. He would die like Dumbledore as well, if she had anything to say about it. Wordlessly, they drew their wands, pointing them at each other in a fury of hexes and curses. The man fought well, unafraid of using a bit of dark, or at least questionable, magic. They parried, the ground growing hot beneath them with spell strikes and glancing hexes. He hit her with a slicing hex that grazed her shoulder, but rather than causing her to draw back, she blazed more ferociously at him, hitting back with a simultaneous punching curse to the torso, and a whip curse to the ankles. The old man fell, just as she knew he would, and Bellatrix cackled as she moved closer, to watch the light fade from the old man's eyes as she choked him with a garroting curse. "So glad you could join me for my little talent showcase, old man," Bellatrix said, with a little smile, staring down into his frantic eyes as his brain struggled to pull in air to keep itself alive. A calm but commanding voice behind her spoke. "Your fight is with me, Bellatrix." She twirled around, the garroting curse slipping from her mind. On the ground next to her the old man sputtered and gasped again. In the center of the corridor, Albus Dumbledore stood looking just as alive as he had that night on the astronomy tower. Many thoughts swirled in Bellatrix's head. "No, you're not," she began, but he cut her off. "But I am, and I'm here. But it turns out you only live twice. So, if you wish to kill my brother, you'll need to kill me first." Dumbledore shot a light, pinching Jinx at her feet, causing her to jump away from the old man, lying on the ground. "Why, that's perfect! I do love a good 2-for-1 bargain. I'll finish off the 2 of you, and then go find that traitorous Snape." The witch leered back at Aberforth on the ground. Raising her wand to point in his face, she flourished it with a practised manner. "Avada!" But she never got to the final word of the spell. Albus Dumbledore raised the hand with its gold finger and aimed. From his wand came a jet of green light. The non-verbal curse stopped her where she stood. For Bellatrix, time seemed to freeze, obliterating all sound except for the bleating note of a distantly wailing trombone. She froze, the look of shock barely registering on her face before she fell, hard, to the ground. The 2 brothers looked at each other, Aberforth disbelieving, Albus contrite. The older of the 2 spoke. "Ab, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. And for everything. For Ariana. For Grindelwald." Aberforth pushed himself up from the ground, dusting off his robes. "We'll discuss it later. For the record, I do believe you. But, Albus, this place is overrun by children. I just saw young ones with Poppy who looked barely old enough to shave." "I quite agree, and I hate it. I've put out a call for help. With any luck, some of the more remote Order members can gather forces and be here soon. However, desperate times call for desperate measures, and until we have backup, they're the only fighters we've got," Albus said regretfully. "Well, you've got me here. Where should we go?" Aberforth asked. Albus smiled gratefully at his younger brother. "Let's head for the astronomy tower. Together." Chapter 48. Vociferations, Vivisection, and Visions in the Vapour. Voldemort fretted in the ramshackle upstairs bedroom of the Shrieking Shack. He had chosen this spot on the advice of Peter Pettigrew, who knew of the place from his Hogwarts years. He had disapparated from Malfoy Manor with Nagini to investigate his other Horcruxes. To his shock and surprise, the ring was no longer located in the gaunt shack. His fury intensified, but he still had the cave and the school, he knew. To reassure himself, he appeared next at the mouth of the cave, dropping the protective enchantments as he went. Crossing the Inferi Lake, lit only by the glow of Nagini's magical cage, had been eerie. For a wizard unafraid of killing, Voldemort was highly afraid of the dead. However, it was nothing to the cold fear that gripped him when he saw the basin empty. So now, he waited for his followers to conquer the school so that he could check there as well. He had come to Hogsmeade accompanied only by Nagini because the fact of the matter was, he was uncertain who he could trust. At one time, his answer would have been either Lucius or Bellatrix. But after learning that his precious Horcruxes that he'd entrusted to them had been allowed to slip through their fingers, he had lost confidence in them. Dolohov had failed him in the Department of Mysteries. Yaxley had allowed the Ministry to be infiltrated. That annoying Umbridge woman attacked for whatever reason. It was true that Snape had killed Dumbledore for him, after years of pretending to be Dumbledore's man. But the fact that the wizard could act so convincingly to Dumbledore struck fear in Voldemort's thoughts. Snape was impossible to read, either visually or through legilimency. It was hard to know the man's true thoughts. And Pettigrew had always been a useless, snivelling little shit. He had no one, really, Voldemort thought with self-pity. Surprisingly, the Death Eater that had proven most useful to him time and time again had been his Muggle cousin, Richard. He'd offered good ideas. He'd completed successful raids. He'd given Voldemort influence over millions of Muggles. Still, he could not be certain how the fight was progressing without an update from his ranks. He lifted his wand to his throat, did a non-verbal sonorous charm, and began to speak. "I know that you are preparing to fight. Your efforts are futile. You cannot fight me. I do not want to kill you. I have great respect for the teachers of Hogwarts. I do not want to spill magical blood. Give me Harry Potter, and none shall be harmed. Give me Harry Potter, and I shall leave the school untouched. Give me Harry Potter, and you will be rewarded. You have until midnight." Then he thought, quietus. He looked around as though examining his surroundings for the first time. The shrieking shack was rather shabby and dated. Most of the furniture was in shambles, nothing like the surroundings to which he had become accustomed. This would not do. This could not be the place that he ascended to new heights, establishing himself as the leader of the wizarding world. This was the bathtub in the tiny bathroom at the Riddle House all over again. Could he and all of his Death Eaters truly fit in this small bedroom whilst he killed the Potter boy? Not too likely, he thought. With a sigh, he disapparated, landing on his bare feet on the soft, moist floor of the Forbidden Forest. It was no kingdom, but it would have to do. From the looks of it, this was the former lair of some very large creatures that had likely been turfed out by the echoing footfalls of the giants. He pressed the mark upon his arm, summoning his followers. There was a deafening cymbal crash from what sounded like 50 feet or so away. "Repello giantus," he said lazily. That should keep Lucius's little band at bay. The distant twang of a guitar faded gently into the night. Perfection. 15 minutes earlier. Only moments after Hermione had stabbed the diadem, the small group of celebrating students had been joined by several members of the Order and those they'd contacted. Ron and Luna had followed Fred and George off to fight in the entrance hall, where they'd eventually run into Theo, who joined their group. Molly Weasley was in a dither about Ginny wanting to stay and fight. At first Molly had refused. It was only after securing the young witch's fervent promise that she would not leave her mother's side for the entirety of the battle that her mother allowed Ginny to stay. The two witches hurried away with Fleur, Mad-Eye, and Arthur. Neville and Pansy left with Dean and Seamus to find the Carrows and exact a bit more revenge. Hermione and Draco hurried off to check that everyone from the lower grades that should have evacuated actually had. And Harry was momentarily alone when Voldemort's voice cut through the haze of the battle. As the final words faded from the air, "You have until midnight," Harry suddenly realized he wasn't as alone as he thought he was. He turned swiftly, wand drawn. The hulking, hook-nosed figure of Severus Snape came upon him from a hidden alcove. "Planning to take me in? Give me over to him?" Harry asked warily. A part of him still did not trust Snape, and possibly never would. "It may be difficult for you to believe, Potter, but not everyone is out to get you. As a matter of fact, it has been my sworn duty to protect you all of this time." "Sure it has," Harry said, an edge to his voice. Snape opened his mouth to respond, but then made a reflexive, involuntary twitch towards his left arm, hissing in pain. "He's calling you, isn't he? You'd better hurry. Don't want to leave the Dark Lord waiting. Potter, there are things you should know." "I doubt there's anything left that you can teach me, Professor," Harry said harshly. "Are you going to answer Voldemort's call?" Sirius asked gravely, indicating Quentin's arm. "No. As far as the Dark Lord should be concerned, I am dead. Killed in battle. I'm sure that Richard will tell him that if he asks. I never told Richard anything about us, but I believe he will lie to cover for me. I think he's known for a long time that I have no taste for the Death Eater life." "Of that I have no doubt," Sirius laughed darkly. "Muggle military intelligence prides itself on knowing everything about everyone, or at least that's what the films will have you believe." Quentin's brow furrowed in confusion. "Is Richard MI6? Sirius gave him a small smile. "He never told you?" "No. I'm boggled, frankly." They both laughed, but the laughter died abruptly when they rounded the corner, coming close upon the sight of Harry Potter and Severus Snape, squaring off silently at each other in a corridor on the 6th floor. Quentin raised his wand quickly, seeing only a Death Eater and Sirius's godson, the possible savior of the wizarding world, readying to fight. A spell jumped from his lips, even as Sirius's arm pulled his arm down quickly. It wasn't quick enough, however. The spell struck Snape across the chest, a great gash that, while fairly shallow, cut a wide swath across the man's torso. "No!" said both Sirius and Harry, watching in horror as the potion's master fell. "What?" Quentin began, only for comprehension to flood his face. "Snape? He's with you, but he killed—" The words died in his throat as the other two wizards began healing charms, to little avail. Madame Pomfrey is in the great hall. We can take him there," Harry said, his face ashen with horror. "No! You heard Voldemort, Harry. You have to stay here. The great hall is too close to the entrance of the school," Sirius urged. Lying on the ground between the three wizards, Snape held his wand in his badly shaking grip, as Quentin and Sirius made to magically move him. The shaking wand touched Snape's temple, drawing away a silver vapour that was at once familiar to Harry. He conjured a vial quickly, and watched in unabashed curiosity as Snape tried and failed to direct the memory into it with a shaky grip. Finally, Harry reached out a hand to steady it as the wand tip touched the glass, depositing the memory. He looked up to find the black eyes boring into his own green ones. "Look at me," Snape croaked out, clenching his teeth against the pane. Harry locked eyes with him for only a moment, then urged the other men to hurry him to Madame Pomfrey. "Find somewhere safe and hide, Harry. Whatever you do, don't leave the castle," Sirius urged, as he and Quentin rushed down the stairs to the great hall, levitating Snape in front of them. Harry turned in a slow circle, taking in the distant noises in the castle around him. After years of anxiety, months of searching, and hours of worry, it had come to this. Voldemort was out there, waiting for Harry to come to him. But there was something more important that he had to do first. He hitched up the sword of Gryffindor that he'd tucked into his belt, and drew in a steadying breath. Then he turned to find the secret passageway behind a nearby tapestry that would take him down to the 3rd floor, near the headmaster's office. "My mark is burning. He is calling us," Lucius said urgently, from where he stood near the fireplace in the back room of the Three Broomsticks. He brandished it for his wife and Richard to see. Richard flinched slightly. He had never seen the brand immediately after the call. It glowed red on Lucius's skin, an angry welt that writhed and seethed. Lucius turned to his wife. "Richard and I are going to go. You stay here, and stay safe."
"The hell I will, Lucius. This is much my fight as yours. I have already had a hand in helping to destroy this man. I will see it finished."
Narcissa's nostrils flared in her righteous indignation. Lucius's eyes widened, and he nodded his acquiescence silently, almost as fearful of his wife as he was of Voldemort. The three of them grasped arms, and the blonde wizard twisted on the spot, bringing the other two with him. The visions within the pensieve weighed heavily on Harry's mind as he watched. To see his mother, his Aunt Petunia, so young, it was both haunting and jarring. Once again, the visions of his father and Snape saddened him. He had seen this scene, the first time 2 years before, and it would never not be shocking and upsetting to him. Even though Sirius and Lupin had explained that his father had matured, had grown, it was still hard to accept. But by far the most eye-opening were the memories of the conversations that Snape had had with Dumbledore. It was true, Dumbledore had kept things from him in 5th year. But Harry thought that their discussions in 6th year had been complete, entirely honest. But here was the devastating reality. When Voldemort tried to kill him, and the spell had rebounded, deflected by his mother's love, a part of Voldemort's soul, an unintended Horcrux, had broken free and latched itself onto Harry. Suddenly, the visions, the ability to understand Parseltongue, the Sorting Hat, telling him that he could be great in Slytherin, that it was all there in his head. All of it made perfect sense to him. The clarity of the moment was devastating. Because if all of this were true, if he truly was a Horcrux, he would need to die in order for Voldemort to be destroyed. And for the prophecy to be fulfilled, it was Voldemort who would need to kill him. Harry rose up from the swirling, vaporous pensieve. He stood up from where he lay prone on the floor. There on the desk, next to the pensieve, lay the sword of Gryffindor. Wouldn't it be better, in fact, to simply run himself into the blade of the sword? It would kill the Horcrux within him, no doubt. They would have one more to scratch from their list. But it could not be this way. Harry looked back over his shoulder at the slumbering portrait of Dumbledore. It had no answers. Dumbledore was still alive, still shut away in the morbid and dreary Black House. These answers, he knew, needed to come from within himself. It had to be at Voldemort's hand, and it was going to be tonight. He gathered his scattered thoughts, pulling all of the threads neatly together, winding them around each other to silence them. Finally, the occlumency lessons that he had failed at in 5th year with Snape became clear. His mind emptied except for one thought, one idea. Find Voldemort. He tucked his wand into his waistband, and pulled the cloak of invisibility over himself. He hefted the weight of the sword in his hands. What to do with it? He could not take it with him, that much was clear. The others would need it. There was still the snake, after all. But to leave it in here might mean that it would not be found when the time was right. He understood that now, having seen Snape, Draco, and Hermione's discussion about valor in the pensieve. As he left the office and descended the moving staircase, he breathed shallowly. Walking to one's own death, it turned out, took even more courage than he'd expected. Stopping at the foot of the staircase, he watched the gargoyle swing back into place. On an impulse, he removed the sword from his belt and laid it carefully behind the statue. When the time came, he had no doubt that it would be found by the right person.
Chapter 49. Incarcerate and Insensate. All around him, cracks of apparition rent the chilly night air of the Forbidden Forest. His fighters were regrouping, and Voldemort began taking stock of who had returned from amongst his most loyal supporters. Rabistan was first, followed by Roll and McNair. Avery, Knott, Crabbe, and Goyle. In quick order 12 more appeared. Lucius and Richard came together with Lucius's wife. Gibbon came last. But Bellatrix, where was she? And Pettigrew? He had expected the 2 of them to arrive first. Had something happened to them? Now that he looked properly, there were several missing. The young Jugson who had worked with Richard, Yaxley, Snape, the Carrows. Had all of them fallen? Voldemort knew that amongst his most loyal were Bellatrix and Wormtail. It was ominous that the 2 of them were missing. Surely they had not been lost in the fighting, he fretted. But it was inevitable that some would die. It could not be him, that much he knew. So long as it was not Nagini, all was well.
"We supposed to be going to meet him, Lecto. We're going to be knee-deep in shit if we don't go."
Amicus Carrow waddled after his taller and slightly less rotund sister, sniffling as he went. They'd just encountered a venomous tentacula that some tosser had left in the corridor outside the 4th floor restrooms where they'd been hiding, and he was allergic.
particularly when this very same plant was trying to crawl down his throat and choke him to death.
Your garb hole is only good for cleaning off dishes and polishing knobs, so why don't you shut it, Amicus? His sister tossed over her shoulder. We're going, as soon as I say we're going, and I'm not going anywhere until I find that little puke stain that put that plant there. I know it was that long-bottom wanker.
A shadow passed just outside of Amicus's vision. Someone was lurking down the corridor. He shuffled to move even closer to Alecto.
Get your filthy boots off my frock, you useless pile of mange!
Alecto shoved him backwards, sending him ass cheeks over elbows.
Lecto, something was back there!
Amicus yelled from the floor.
Well, why didn't you stun it?
Why didn't you stun it, you daft bit? He grumbled, pushing himself up to his feet. Alecto shoved him again with her boot heel, setting off a fresh round of rabble-rousing.
Because neither of you are worth a damn at curses, an unruffled witch's voice said from behind them. Both heads whipped around to see Pansy Parkinson and Neville Longbottom, both their wands trained on the siblings.
What the hell do you know, you stupid witch?
Amicus said with a sneer.
I've seen you try and fail at curses all year.
Pansy fixed him with a look of disdain. The fact that you didn't know we were only pretending to fail proves my point precisely. Without another word, she shot a non-verbal incarcerous curse at the two of them. Amicus, on the ground, was immediately bound, but Alecto jumped sideways out of the path of the spell, her wand casting wildly. Pansy was hit with a bombarda and flew backwards. "Pansy!" Neville yelled. He shot a slicing hex at the Carrow sister, but it glanced off her. Then he rushed to check on Pansy. Alecto bore down on the young couple, challenging his shield charm as she came. "Confringo!" A powerful older witch's voice rang out from the space in which Amicus had spotted movement earlier. The bombardier hex obscured the woman's features from the four of them, but one of the four of them knew exactly who it was, without any shadow of doubt in his mind. There was a whoosh, and a nearby plinth crumbled into hundreds of large, jagged pebbles. "Opugno!" the voice called again, and Neville threw himself over the nearly unconscious Pansy to shield her from any fallout. His grandmother's charm work, however, had improved greatly since her Hogwarts days. It cut precisely through the air, and the pebbles pelted down furiously, only on the Carrows. When he looked over his shoulder at the fight between the Carrows and Augusta Longbottom, it was hardly a fight at all. The bloodied Alecto was straining against the tight bindings that had shot from Augusta's wand, and the wands of the sister and brother were held in Augusta's outstretched hand. Next to him, Pansy sat up, dazed. "It's my Gran," Neville said in quiet relief.
"No, I'm Pansy," the young witch mumbled sarcastically, touching her head gingerly.
Neville laughed. He performed a quick diagnostic charm. Pansy was bruised and scratched, but otherwise okay. He gathered her in his arms, pulling her close against him, creating a bit of space between them only to kiss her face and neck fiercely. "You're all right," he said, as though to reassure himself.
"I'm fine, Nev. Give me a minute, yeah? I'm about to meet your grandmother for the first time, and my blouse is torn half off," Pansy said primly. They stood and dusted themselves off. They approached Augusta to see her checking the bindings on the two Carrows. She turned to the young couple, snapping the two confiscated wands. "You're both unhurt?" the older witch asked. "Yeah, Gran, we're fine. Thanks for asking," Neville answered. "Thanks for your help." "Of course," the imposing witch said. "Fine work with the plants back there, my boy." Neville blushed at the praise. "I appreciate it." Augusta pushed her wand into her oversized red handbag and dusted off her hands briskly. She pushed her glasses up her nose wondlessly and peered in a not unfriendly way at Pansy. "So, this is the girl, is it, Neville?"
Yes, Gran."
Neville cleared his throat and stood a bit straighter.
"Yes, this is Pansy Parkinson."
"Yes, I knew your grandmother, Laurel Burke. We were in school together. She was a Ravenclaw, poor thing," Augusta said, as though Laurel had contracted a mildly irritating case of doxy fever. Pansy clamped her lips together to avoid laughing. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Longbottom. Thank you for your help."
"Not at all. Well, if you're both all right, I'm off. I promised Minerva we'd fight together when the time came."
Augusta drew them both into a quick but perfunctory hug.
"Stun them before you go, all right, Neville?"
She pointed to the bound Carrows.
"Will do," he said confidently.
The young witch and wizard stood arm in arm to watch her go, then took aim with their wands at the Carrows with barely suppressed glee. Augusta trotted as quickly and stealthily as her arthritic knees would allow down the staircase to the next floor. She was in her element, on the offensive where she belonged. From the corner of her eye, a silver wink caught her gaze. She turned and doubled back, withdrawing the familiar sword of Gryffindor by its hilt.
"Hello, old friend,"
she smiled, opening her undetectably extended red handbag and pushing the sword carefully inside. The missing ones were most certainly dead, he thought. Large gaps in the stalwart circle of his soldiers mocked him. But no matter. In the end, it was only his prodigious skill, his ability to defeat Potter, that mattered.
"What time is it?"
he called quietly into the darkness.
"Midnight, my lord,"
Lucius said softly.
"Exactly midnight?"
he asked, ever the peevish, seldom satisfied toddler. Lucius squinted more closely at his pocket watch in the dark, turning it towards his Lumos wand ineffectively. Richard pressed a button on his Timex Indiglo. 12:02, cousin."
"He should be here by now,"
Voldemort said in a plaintive voice. He gripped his wand of yew and phoenix feather tightly in his right hand, whilst in his left robe pocket he lightly fingered the other wand, the special one. Where was Harry Potter? The twigs barely crunched under his feet as he stepped. The forest was missing its usual sounds of owls hooting, animals scurrying for cover, trees swaying in the harsh spring Highlands wind. Instead, there was an occasional low, mournful note. Was that a saxophone? Harry tilted his head, momentarily confused. But no matter. He had a task, a final mission to carry out. Already he felt closer to dead than alive in the tomb-like silence of the forest, minus the saxophone. Would this be what it was like to die? Silence. Darkness. Would there be a golden light? Or harp music? Harry stopped to listen. Yes, that was definitely harp music. His breath tore from his throat. The cool spring evening so peaceful compared to the dueling storms in his heart and his head. Suddenly he remembered Dumbledore's words. The ring. This would be the moment, then. Opening his bag, he took out the ring, turning it in his hand 3 times. A vision appeared before him,
achingly similar to the one he had seen in the mirror of Erised so many years before. His mother and father, but no longer two-dimensional, no longer silent. "Harry, you've been so brave." The assembled Death Eaters stood waiting in silence. Richard was more than a bit displeased to see that they had been joined by several snatchers, including the hulking, toothsome werewolf, Fenrir Greyback. He'd sincerely hoped never to encounter that particular man again. Richard silently counted the seconds, wondering if the boy would show up. If the stories that Hermione had told him were true, he had no doubt that the Potter boy would eventually appear. His mind wandered back to a meeting he'd had days before, knowing that this time was likely drawing close. Narcissa had brought him and Linda to the doorstep of 12 Grimmauld Place, after Richard had shown her the parchment upon which the address had been written. Narcissa was full of memories of the place. She had had to visit as a child, hosted by the deranged and raving Walburga at the insistence of her mother. None of the memories were pleasant. But their visit today was to discuss the future, not the past.
"Many years ago, Harry's mother sacrificed her own life to protect his," Dumbledore explained. "That meant that throughout his childhood, he had her blood protection keeping him safe. Voldemort knew about this old magic, but he always discounted it as a fool's magic." Dumbledore continued, "I had assumed that Voldemort would have tried to take Harry's blood to revive himself, thereby attempting to steal that magical protection for himself. However, he chose a different enemy for the spell, namely, myself. This means that Harry will be unprotected if they are to meet face to face. It will be up to us, up to you, to protect him when the time comes."
And so now, as they stood in the darkened forest, Richard readied himself. Earlier in the evening, whilst waiting for news back at the Three Broomsticks, he had withdrawn the small packet that Linda had passed him back at their home in Hampstead. He'd broken open the packaging carefully, and removed one small glass cylinder from its packaging. He had meticulously loaded the cylinder into his own McDonald's straw. Now, here in the forest, he had carefully uncapped the end of the cylinder, and had concealed the straw in his hand, held tightly against his wrist, mindful not to prick his skin with the minuscule needle. "He should be here by now," bleated the high, miffed voice of Voldemort. There was a sudden rustling and flapping of fabric in front of them. "I am here," Potter's voice said, and a moment later the boy swam into view, his cloak of invisibility thrown off. Everyone in the circle, with the exception of 2 people, gaped at the wizard, agog. It was time. With quick, furtive movements, Richard lifted the straw to his mouth at the same time that he inhaled deeply. As the straw reached his lips, he took careful aim at the gaunt, grey cheek of Voldemort. He blew hard. As the tiny dart of lidocaine sailed to its target, Narcissa slid her eyes to the right, watching it pierce its mark. Magically, she pushed the plunger, dispersing the liquid throughout the jaw of the Dark Lord. With the final wave of her hand, "Evanesco," the needle vanished. The glint of Richard's indigo watch, its face turned inward in his wrist, briefly lit the syringe as it flew. Thankfully, the only eyes that noticed it belonged to Lucius. Voldemort crumpled to his knees, his hand cupped to his cheek. "What was that?"
"What was what, my lord?"
Lucius asked, eyes wide. Did Richard Granger just kill the Dark Lord that easily? But no. The red eyes were still alert, staring about in confusion. "I don't know. Something feels off," Voldemort said, panicking at the strange, numb sensation that was overcoming his face and tongue. As he tried to press his lips to his teeth to form the F sound, spittle flew everywhere. Lucius looked up, meeting his wife's eyes. He had not missed the minuscule movement that her wand had made less than a second after Richard's projectile met its target.
"An insect, perhaps. I have seen several buzzing about, my lord."
"Yes," Voldemort said, straightening up. He pushed away Lucius's concerned grip on his arm. The dark wizard's angry red gaze bore down on the boy in the center of the circle. "Harry Potter, the boy who lived, come to why?" Or, at least that was what he attempted to say. His words were garbled. His hard consonants came out with a soft, sibilant, sputtering sound. He raised his wand, his arm strong enough now to control the long, thin twig of yew, even as it preferred the supple hollowness of plastic. "Abwaba Kadabra!" For a half-moment, nothing happened. Then, wide-eyed with panic, Lucius hunched his body slightly to shield his wand from the view of Lord Voldemort and the other Death Eaters to his sides. Pointing it surreptitiously towards Harry Potter, he murmured, "Kedras!" The tripping jinx instantly brought the scar-faced wizard to the floor of the Forbidden Forest, dropping him where he stood. Narcissa rushed forward, coming to stand between Voldemort and Potter. She knelt down, placing her hand on the boy's neck. She whispered almost silently, "Stay down and act dead." "Is he dead?" the high, struggling voice of Voldemort asked. "He is dead, my lord," Narcissa called clearly to him. Voldemort raised his hands as though in victory, letting out a muffled grunt of success. The rest of the Death Eaters were silent, unsure of what exactly had happened, but taking Narcissa's word for it. "We will go back to the castle. We will bring the boy's body to show them. Lucius, whoever takes the boy, let us go." It took a few moments for the Death Eaters to catch up, owing to the fact that Voldemort had suddenly become so difficult to understand. Finally, however, the group began to move. Voldemort, Lucius, and Richard led the group in the front, with the somewhat limp body of Harry Potter floating before them. They trooped towards Hogwarts Castle, the apparent victors.
Thank you for listening to The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great78. If you enjoyed this and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts at Silver and Copper, or search Great78 on Archive of Our Own.